Some of you may have read a book that I wrote not too long ago called Wishes Fulfilled. And in Wishes Fulfilled, I make this sort of pronouncement that not only are all of us capable of transcending this concept of being ordinary, but we're inherently imbued with the notion of who we are is really a piece of God. Yeah, we are connected to our source of being in a way that most of us have been trained to believe is not possible. We've been raised to believe what can't be done, what's impossible, what the limitations are, what other people can do, but what we can't do, and so on. And for me, moving into this place of an elevated state of consciousness, a higher degree of awareness, where we are capable of doing what Jesus said in the New Testament, that even the least among you can do all that I have done and even greater things. And I took that literally when I read that. Before I wrote Wishes Fulfilled, I read the entire New Testament. And in the process of reading the New Testament, I took the words of Jesus and where he encourages us to believe that we are one with the Father, that there is another kind of awareness that's available to us. But we've got to get past this idea of our limitations and past this idea of what our subconscious mind has trained us to believe in. I'm really not going to say anything. I'm just going to have you look at the word that I wrote across my chest. That's really what it's all about. My name is Wayne Dyer. I'm 73 years old, and I have sex almost every day. Thank you. Almost on Monday, almost on Tuesday, almost at 73, almost is just fine. The truth is, and I normally don't say this, but 4 days ago, I was in a hospital in San Diego, having 2 injections put into my spine, and was told by the physicians that it was absolutely not to even be considered that I would get on an airplane. One was in my neck for some kind of a bone fragment in there that just doesn't seem to want to let up, and the other is in my spine after perhaps running all those marathons and all of those years of activity. So I'm here. And actually the injections of cortisone and steroids and whatever else they put in there worked for everything except for my ability to look down. If I bend down, it's over. And I meditated from 3 o'clock this morning until about 7, and the answer I got was, you should always look up. So if every once in a while something grabs me and throws me to the floor, but my kids were there with me when this thing attacked me, and it did take me to the floor. So the pain was something like I've never experienced before. I told my wife, who had 7 children, that this was 7 times 7 childbirth pains, but she also told me that if men had babies, there would be no such word as sibling. So I have 8 children, 6 daughters and 2 sons. They have been amongst my greatest teachers in my life. My children, my daughters particularly, were the ones that always reminded me that how humble and stay close to the earth. If I ever raised my voice or said something that was inconsistent with what they saw on television or read in my books or heard everybody talking about, they would stand there with their hand on their hips and roll up, and I wonder what all those people would think of Mr. Positive if they could see him here this morning. I heard my daughter say one morning when I talked a little bit too loud, probably the best line I ever heard from my children, because I used to follow them around and say, come on, say something stupid. I need some material, you know. It's like, but my wife had gone away for a month to be in silence, and I didn't understand why. We had 5 children in 8 years. After about 20 minutes of her being gone, I understood. She went to a monastery and didn't even leave a phone number. It's true. And they were all gathered at the breakfast table one morning, and my daughter, Summer, who was about 13 at the time, looked at her sister, Serena, who was 11, and said, so, if you didn't have any feet, would you wear shoes? And Serena looked at her like she couldn't believe that anyone would even ask such a silly question. She said, that's the most ridiculous question I've ever heard. What do you mean if I didn't have any feet, would I wear shoes? That's so stupid. Of course not. And Summer said to her, well, don't get mad at me. I'm just wondering why you're wearing that bra. I just don't understand that. It's like, so I immediately wrote it down, and but they have been great teachers of mine, and it's one of the great roles I have in my life, to be able to say I'm the father of eight beautiful children who are making a big difference in the world. The book that was just mentioned, I saw for the first time last night, about 10 o'clock. It won't be published in the United States until March. And it's really, what I did is, on June the 26th of last year, 2012, I told my family that I was through with this writing business, and that I had written 40 books, and we had sold millions and millions of copies in almost 50 languages around the world over the past 35 or 40 years. And that I really didn't have anything more to prove, and I didn't want to take that on anymore. And all the things that and I really was very adamant about that I didn't want to have another contract, I didn't want to have to look at blank pages, I didn't want to have to do the research and all of the things that are involved in putting together and writing a book. That was June the 26th. On June the 27th, I woke up and I started writing. And I wrote every single day, 3 writing sessions a day, morning, afternoon, and evening, for the next 5 months, every single day. In fact, I think that has something to do with what happened here in my neck. It was just sitting there, because I write by longhand, and just letting it come and come and come and come. And And the interesting thing about this whole writing business, and particularly this book, is that sometimes you think that you're the one that's in charge of your life. I was doing an interview one time with the New York Times, and I was honored to be there in the same room with Arthur Miller. Arthur Miller is a very famous American playwright. He wrote The Crucible and Death of a Salesman, and is most famous for being married to Marilyn Monroe, but he was a brilliant, brilliant man, and I was honored to be there. And the interviewer asked him the question. He was 91 years old. And the interviewer asked him the question, are you working on another book or another play? Are you writing another play? And his answer always intrigued me, never forgotten it. This was many years ago. He said, I don't know, but I probably am. but I probably am. And I think what he was saying and what I am saying to you is that there is something bigger in this universe. Deepak and I will be speaking about it a little bit later today when we come on stage this afternoon. There's something in the universe that is moving those checkers around on this checkerboard called your life. And all this time that we think that we are the ones who are making choices and creating the world that we're creating for ourselves, there's also something else that's much bigger taking place. And there's a quotation at the beginning of this book. I'm going to do this very carefully. Ooh. I'm asking for all of your energy, like there's 3,000 of us here, so if you can just all send lots of healing energy on this thing. So it says here, it was written by a man named Rashad Field. And Rashad Field is a man who's still alive. He was born in 1936, lives in England, and he's a Sufi. And, and he spent a good part of his life in Turkey and learning the ways of the Sufi. The most famous things that the Sufis say that is, if you don't have a temple in your heart, you'll never find your heart in a temple. And it's about having this thing that I have on my chest emblazoned into your consciousness and coming from that place. And Rashad Field wrote a book that came to me in one of those ways that I can never explain. I was speaking in Glasgow, Scotland last year, and I was in the process of writing this book. And I had a friend there, her name is Michelle, and she's the director for Hay House in the United Kingdom. And people had given me a lot of gifts and a lot of books when I was there, and I asked her if she would box them all up and send them to me in my home in Maui. And she said, yeah, she would do that. So, because I was getting ready to go down to London and give a talk, and then we were going out in the Mediterranean on a cruise. And I packed up all the books and all the gifts that people had given me and put them in this box and wrapped it up and put my address on it, and she sent it to me. So when about 2 months later, I got back home, and I looked at the box, and right at the top of the box, inside the box, was a book called The Last Barrier, written by Rashad Field. And it was part of a trilogy. And it was a sort of a yellowish, kind of strange-looking book, real small, looked like it was very old, and sun-beaten and so on. And I called Michelle. I said, this book that's here at the top, I said, by Rashad Field, I said, did you put that in the box? Did you open it up and put it back in there? And she said, no. I said, well, how in the world did it get there? She said, I have no idea. I didn't put it in there, and I didn't put it in there. So when those kinds of things happen, I pay very close attention. I used to go, booga, 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 what's going on here? How did this happen? Try to figure it all out, and put everything into sort of our logical mind to get it all figured out. But I couldn't figure it out at all. So I decided I was going to read it, because it must have been something very important that was being directed towards me. And it was a very fascinating journey into the world of the Sufis. But it was part of a trilogy. And the second book in this trilogy was a book called To Know We Are Loved, which is, of course, to him, the most important thing that any of us need to know, is to have a recognition and an awareness that all of us are loved in some way or another. So I was reading through that book, and all of a sudden this paragraph came to me, and it was a reflection of everything that I had been writing every single day for the previous 5 months. And this is what it said. I put it at the very opening page of this. He says, if we stop for a moment, it is possible to perceive a pattern in our lives the motivators that have influenced us become much more obvious. Let me get my glasses. I'm getting lots of noise in my neck here. We are able to see life unfolding from both ends at once, coming into the present moment. But until we have got to a certain point of realization, this is not possible, because everything is still seen as a series of apparent causes and effects. Now let me say it again, and listen to this carefully, because this is what motivated me to sit down and write this book, which is really 58 short chapters on all of the quantum moments that have taken place in my life that brought me to this stage here today in Melbourne. If we stop for a moment, it is possible to perceive a pattern in our lives. The motivators that have influenced us become much more obvious. We are able to see life unfolding from both ends at once, coming into the present moment. Now think about that, from both ends at once. Because most of us believe, as he says in his conclusion, until we get to a certain point of realization, this is not possible, because everything is still seen as a series of apparent causes and effects. So most of us believe that the things that have brought us to this place in our life are the result of all of the events, things that have taken place and brought us to this point. But the fact is that there are two different kinds of time. One of these times, sorry, give me a moment, this thing's gonna pass. The time that I'm talking about here is called horizontal time. And horizontal time is the time that we call chronos time, chronological time. This happened, and then this happened, and this caused this to happen, and we tend to think that time is this horizontal thing that is the result of this cause and effect. And it's measured by a horizontal line. But there's another kind of time. And the other kind of time I call eternal time. And eternal time has a vertical line. And this is a line that goes straight up to God. And this is the line that I was speaking about when I was talking about Arthur Miller, when he said, I don't know, but I probably am. That there is something that is taking place, that you have a sense that you're not the one who's really in charge of it. And as I look at my own life, and all of the things that have transpired in my life and brought me to this place, there's a sense as I got to this place now at the age of 72 to look back as I was writing and realize that all of this was already handled. It was all taken care of. And all this time that I thought I was making all of these choices, in fact, I was making them within a context of everything already being taken care of for me. And what Rashad Field says in that Sufi book is that when you take chronos time and you take vertical time, and where they cross, where they hit at this point, you begin to have an awareness of how you fit in to this whole thing with time. It's like I go back in my own life and I start this book out when I was just a very young boy. And the first 10 years of my life, I spent in a series of foster homes and orphanages. My father walked out on our family. My mother had 3 boys by the time she was 23 years old. And he just thought that this was too much for him, so he just walked away. And when I was just a very little baby, my mother used to tell me, and my mother, by the way, just passed away. My mother got us all back together again when I was 10 years of age, and we lived with her up until She passed away just last July, and I still feel her presence with me today. Been asking her for help with this little issue that I'm dealing with. As a young boy, I had a destiny. Every single one of us has a destiny. And that destiny is something that is taken care of long before we ever even show up into this world. And most of us aren't really aware of what that destiny is. I think of the first experience. I spent the first 10 years in a foster home. And my mother then remarried in 1949 and got her whole family all back together again. And in the process of getting her family back together again, she married another man who was very much like my father, a drunk, because life gives exams. It's like algebra, and if you don't pass it the first time, you got to take it over again. And she ended up doing that very thing. And I was 10 years old, and my next oldest brother, Dave, and I lived in all of these different places, went from home to home to home to home. And when I went to my very first school, living with my mother, I met my oldest brother for the very first time. I was in a school, it was Arthur Elementary School in Detroit, Michigan. And in that class with Mrs. Engels, there was a teacher in there who would read to us every single day. And she would read to us from a book at 3:15 until 3:30 in the afternoon. And in the process of doing this reading, I became just enamored of what it was that she had to offer us. It was a book that became one of the most important books in my life. And I became the enforcer in the classroom in the 4th grade at Arthur Elementary School. So that if she would read to us only under the condition that if the class was good, then she would read to us. And if the class made a lot of noise or was disruptive or whatever, she just wouldn't read. That was sort of our punishment. And I wanted to hear what she had to say more than anything. So what I did was I became the enforcer in the classroom. And if somebody started to get out of hand or would speak out inappropriately, I would get up and walk around the room and tell them, no, I want to hear this book. And the book was it was a book written back in 1909. It was called The Secret Garden. I don't know how many know The Secret Garden or read The Secret Garden. But it was about a little orphan girl named Mary who discovered this place in her, where she was living, where she could go within and find a sense of peace and find joy and be able to create anything that she wanted. And she had these friends that were in there. One of them's name was Dickon, and she was able to heal people by walking into this place. And I kept thinking, because this was the first time that I had lived with my family in the previous 10 years of my life. And I was also just very terrified that I was going to have to go back. And that my mother was, because she was a stranger to me at that time. So here I was, a little 10-year-old orphan boy, back with his family, exactly like I was hearing in the Secret Garden, as she read it to us every single day. And I think, what was I doing at the age of 10? Because I think I have spent this entire lifetime of mine, 40-some books, 45 years of writing, trying to teach people that there is something inside of you, a place that you can go where there's a secret garden, where you don't have to be in pain, where you don't have to be afraid, and it's something that's yours and yours alone. And that was the beginning. And when I think about this chronological time and this eternal time, that every single one of our lives is orchestrated around this same principle, that every decision that you're making. I had a great teacher when I was studying for my doctorate. His name, I was studying under Carl Jung, not him personally. I was 12 years old when he died, but I was a Jungian analyst. And Carl Jung said at the very same moment that you are a protagonist in your own life and you're making choices, at the very same moment, you're also a spear carrier or an extra in a much, much larger drama. And this was the awareness that we are making choices, and within those choices, there is something that we have signed up for, or something that is providing us with the energy, whatever it is that we need to fulfill a destiny that we have. But most of us don't get to that destiny. Excuse me. Because we've been raised to believe something about ourselves that is an illusion. We've been raised to believe that we are ordinary. And in order to get past this idea of our ordinariness, we have to come to a whole new place in our life. I was at a seminar many years ago with a woman named Portia Nelson. And we were given 5x8 cards. And on these 5x8 cards, we had to write down the 5 chapters of our life. And we couldn't go more than what was written on this page because it didn't get too long because everybody had to read them. Well, Portia Nelson wrote these words describing the 5 chapters of her life. She was a woman in probably her mid-40s. And this is what she said. She said, "Chapter 1 of my life. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes me forever to find a way out. Chapter 2 of my life. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. And it still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3 of my life. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my own fault. And I get out immediately. Chapter 4 of my life. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. And what I love was chapter 5. I walk down another street. Isn't that beautiful? Portia Nelson. What I want to present to you in the time that I have with you here this morning is what I call walking down another street. A street that takes us from what I call ordinary levels of consciousness, which is what we've been raised to believe in. We have this subconscious mind of ours, and this subconscious mind of ours has been raised to believe that who we are is just ordinary. Some of you may have read a book that I wrote not too long ago called Wishes Fulfilled. And in Wishes Fulfilled, I make this sort of pronouncement that not only are all of us capable of transcending this concept of being ordinary, but we're inherently imbued with the notion of who we are is really a piece of God. Yeah, we're connected to our source of being in a way that most of us have been trained to believe is not possible. We've been raised to believe what can't be done, what's impossible, what the limitations are, what other people can do, but what we can't do, and so on. And for me, moving into this place of an elevated state of consciousness, a higher degree of awareness, where we are capable of doing what Jesus said in the New Testament, that even the least among you can do all that I have done, and even greater things. And I took that literally when I read that. Before I wrote Wishes Fulfilled, I read the entire New Testament. And in the process of reading the New Testament, I took the words of Jesus, and where he encourages us to believe that we are one with the Father, that there is another kind of awareness that's available to us. But we've got to get past this idea of our limitations and past this idea of what our subconscious mind has trained us to believe in. Because you see, the subconscious mind of ours is what we do most of our activity with. We go out into the world and we get up in the morning and we get ready and we drive to work, and we don't think about how to drive the car. We don't think about how we shave. We don't think about how we make our breakfast. And, you know, about 96 to 97% of what we do, according to Bruce Lipton, is done with this, with just our subconscious mind. We just go about doing all of these things. And within each and every one of us, there is also a conscious mind that is only operating on about 3 or 4% of what is possible for us. We don't really believe that it's possible for us to heal ourselves. When I was in the United States Navy for 4 years, from the age of 18 to 22, I was sent to the infirmary because I had developed something. I was stationed on Guam, and I developed something on my lower back called a polynidal cyst. And I went to this ward where so many young sailors who lived in these kind of climates had developed these cysts on their backbone, on their tailbone. And my job, I got there on a Friday, and I was scheduled for surgery on Monday morning. And on Friday, my job was to take care of all of the other guys who had also contacted this thing that comes to people who aren't used to this kind of a climate. And I looked at them after surgery, and they had had half of their rear ends cut away, and I had to bathe them, and I had to help them with all of this stuff, and I knew that it was my turn on Monday morning. And in the process, at that time, I was about 20 years old. I was 21. And I was reading a book by Max Maltz called Psycho-Cybernetics, in which he was talking about the ability of our minds to heal ourselves, which is what I'm focusing on even as I'm up here talking to you right now. This ability to make something, to realize that who we are is much, much, much more powerful than anything that we might have ever imagined. And so here I was, 21 years old, being told by a bunch of doctors that it was my turn on Monday morning to have this surgery, and they were going to cut into me, and I would be there for a while, and I had to sign a consent form. And I went back to my to the barracks where I was staying, and I put my mind on eliminating this thing from my body. I focused on it, I concentrated on it, I put my attention on it, I put my intention on it, and just stayed with that awareness that I have within me the power to heal myself. And I take this kind of internal awareness about my abilities to be able to do things very seriously, and I wrote about it a lot in I Can See Clearly Now. And in less than 24 hours, I was able to completely send this thing out of my body. And it was an awareness that I held with me and kept with me, that whatever it is that's going on inside of me, that I have much more power and much more ability to be able to get past this idea that I'm limited, or that I have to be a victim of what somebody else says I can do or can't do, or what's possible or not possible for me. So in raising my children, I have my youngest daughter, who is now 24. Her name is Sage. But when she was about 5 or 6 years old, she developed something on her face called flat warts. And these flat warts were all over her body, or rather all over her face, and they were getting worse and worse and worse as the time was going on. And we took her to the dermatologist, and the dermatologist said, well, we can burn them off, or we can give you a medication that's going to leave your face, swollen and so on. And these are all the options. And I took her aside and I said, honey, there's another option. She said, what's that? I said, well, you can talk to them. You can talk to your bumps. And you can tell them that they've been with you long enough, and you would really appreciate it if they would go somewhere else now, and that you weren't interested in having them with you any longer. So she said she would go for that option. She didn't want to have them burned off. She didn't want to have this medication that was going to scar her face. And she went back to her room where she was staying, where we were on Maui, and I saw her in the bedroom, and she had a blanket over her head, and she had a flashlight in there, and I heard her talking to these bumps. Now, these had been getting worse and worse and worse by the day, and that was the Tuesday, and then Wednesday and Thursday, and by Friday morning, she finally came to this place where she had this awareness, this realization that these things were disappearing, that they were gone. And she came out on Friday after 4 days of constantly putting her attention on her ability to heal herself of these things. They were gone. And she wrote about that, and she actually wrote a little children's book about that whole idea that within each and every one of us, we have this amazing power to be able to move from thinking of ourselves as just ordinary into this elevated level of consciousness in which we begin to think of ourselves as capable of manifesting or making anything happen that we would like to have happen for ourselves in our lives. And it's sort of been the symbol of my life. I was very blessed to have as a mentor and a great teacher a man named Abraham Maslow back in the 1960s. And Dr. Maslow was considered to be like the founder of self-actualization and higher consciousness. And he was the first person who ever took this whole field of psychology and said, instead of studying people and looking at all the things that they're not capable of doing and what's not possible for them, let's reverse it and study the people who have reached the very highest levels and then make assumptions about what is possible for them to do. And one of the things that he said about these self-actualizing people, his whole life was based on the study of that. And I Can See Clearly Now, I talk about my meetings with Maslow and how they dramatically impacted my whole course of study. Because it was back in 1968 when a young woman named Nancy Armstrong walked into my office, and she handed me a book, which was an essay written by Abraham Maslow called The Whole Man. And in this essay, he described these characteristics or these qualities of the highest functioning people. And one of those qualities was this awareness or the recognition that you have to be independent of the good opinion of other people. You have to know that within you, oh, sorry about that. Within you, there is a divine connection, a connection, if you will, to God. And I used to tell my audiences that when I was in the 3rd grade and I came home from school and Mrs. Scarf out in Mount Clemens, Michigan. And Mrs. Scarf was just this wonderful person who took in a whole lot of children like us who didn't have the same opportunities that other children had at that time. And I came home from school and I said to Mrs. Scarf, I said, "What's a scurvy elephant?" And she said, "A what?" I said, "A scurvy elephant." I heard Mrs. Poole, who was my third grade teacher, telling the principal that Wayne Dyer was in her classroom and that he was a scurvy elephant. So Mrs. Scarf got on the phone, she called the principal, and the principal said, "Oh no, that's Wayne. He gets everything mixed up." She didn't say that he was a scurvy elephant in her classroom. She said that he was a disturbing element in her classroom. And I think becoming a scurvy elephant is one of the highlights, if you will, of being able to move from this place of ordinary consciousness into higher and higher levels of extraordinary consciousness, being independent of the good opinion of other people, and also being detached from outcome. That is, living your life from a place of purpose and knowing that you are here for something. And I think perhaps the most important message that Maslow ever taught me was this whole notion of finding what he called finding your excitement. And your excitement is the thing that makes you feel good. And the thing that makes you feel good, you know, Muktananda, the great teacher in India, used to say to all the people who would enter his ashram, "Do you know the difference between good and God?" And when they said they didn't know, he would just hold up his fingers like this and say, "It's just one little zero." So anything that makes you feel good is your excitement. And finding that passion within you, finding the place within you, that thing that you're aware is what you're here for. And it seems to me that when I was just a very young boy, that there was a tapestry of my life that was played out. Here I was reading The Secret Garden, listening to the ideas that each and every one of us have these magnificent abilities, that each and every one of us are pieces of God, connected to God. And it's one of the things that people have the most difficulty with, I think, in looking at wishes fulfilled. One of the things I get the most criticism for, there's a statement in there that says, come to the recognition that you are God, that each and every one of us are pieces of God. And when you have that recognition that you are God, that you are eternal, that this thing that you are in, called your body, isn't who you are. Most of us can't answer that question, the simple philosophical question, which is, who am I? You know, who am I really? Who I am is, I have a picture on my wall of when I was 21 years old, and I look at that picture, and I can't find one cell that was in that body when I was 21 that's still on this planet here today. There's not one cell of it left. And yet I believed when I was in that body, I was in a little 2-year-old body, and I was in a 10-year-old body, and a 20-year-old body, and so on. And each time that I was in those bodies, I really believed that this is who I was. But then, in fact, here I am now in a 73-year-old body. And the body that I walked in here in today is different than the body that I'll walk out of here later on today.